Hello there friends, Ian here. This week we're going to continue last week's conversation about point of view or perspective, and begin talking about each one and how you write them. Well, most of them. The first point of view or perspective we will be looking at is first person. First person is very versatile and uses the pronouns I, me, my, and more. First person is basically the character of the story narrating it for you. We get to see the story through the lens of the main character or whoever the narrator is. First person doesn't have to be through the eyes of the protagonists themselves either. Point of view character could be someone on the side who's with the character for the entire time. Maybe the narrator is the antagonist or the bad guy, or who everyone sees as the bad guy. This perspective is often very heavily character-based rather than plot-based. With that being said, let's get into it. We went over this briefly in the last video. First thing that lends itself very well to first person is that it is very intimate and immersive. Probably the most intimate and immersive point of view you can read. This is also how you tell stories in real life. If you talk about yourself, you talk in first person. You've most likely already talked in first person today to someone about something that happened previously in your life. Maybe even just a few minutes ago. The fact that it is this way makes it very immersive to you and other people reading the story. You get deep into the heads of the character that's narrating the story, and you get to know everything about them. You get to run the story with them, see every one of their thoughts as they go through the story, and you get to feel these thoughts just as much as the narrator does. Knowing the characters this much makes the story feel a lot more intimate than it might otherwise feel. The next thing that first person is good for is unreliable narrators. Since the character themselves are telling the story, then they're able to hide things from you. The character can lie and make the story seem different. Unreliable narrators are either deliberately deceptive or are unknowingly misguided. Once you find out that the narrator has been unreliable or has been lying to you, you start to think about if the story could really have been this way, or if everything the narrator has told you up until now has been a big lie. Of course, you can do unreliable narrators in the third person, but first person is the best place, I think, to include an unreliable narrator. So if you're looking to add an unreliable narrator, first person might be the best place for you to start writing. First person also makes room for more creativity. Without being able to do things like you can in third person, like being able to describe things that the protagonist or character might not know, you have to always stick in your character's head. This forces you to be more creative with ways to get your story done and different story beats completed. You could use POVs of other characters, but I caution against using too many of these. There are, of course, other things you can do, but there's a lot of them, and it would make the video too long if I were to go into each and every one of them. First person also allows you to demonstrate a unique voice. Every character has their own unique voice, but being in first person allows you, again, to get deep into the character's head, so you get to explore their voice a lot more than you might otherwise in different perspectives like third person limited or third person omniscient. You could have characters on the autism spectrum that you might not otherwise get to know as well as you do with your first person story. You could also tell the first person story from the bad person's perspective and get a unique twisted view on what the world is like to them. You get to see in their head, which allows a very big expansion of their voice. However, if you do write something you don't know, like through the eyes of a psychopath or through the eyes of someone on the autism spectrum, make sure you do your research because you want to be able to show these different things with as much authenticity as possible. Like anything else, you should be making sure what you're writing makes sense if it's something that's coming out of the real world. However, there is always negatives to everything that has some positives to it. The first thing that's very hard to overcome with first person is that your perspective is very limited. You are only limited to what the narrator or the point of view character knows and feels. You are not allowed to go outside of that person's perspective or point of view, or it won't be the first person you think of. You certainly don't get as wide of a scope as you do in third person with first person, and that is something you do have to overcome. The next thing that's hard with first person is switching viewpoints. It is very difficult to transition from one character to another. Just using their name as the title of the story might not be enough to get it across that that character is who we're seeing it through. Switching through multiple point of view characters can be jarring in first person, so make sure you limit it just a little bit. The next bad thing about first person is that sentence structure risks becoming repetitive. A lot of writers first starting out in first person have a very hard time getting out of using the word I at the start of every sentence. And this can lead to very repetitive sentence structure. There are other ways that your structure can become repetitive that you need to fix. But if you're in the first draft, don't worry about it. However, once you start editing, that's when you really need to start making sure your sentence structure is varied and doesn't always start with the word I. The next thing is that subplots can become very difficult. In third person, you can transition from character to character very easily, filling out subplots as you go, which is why third person is very good for plot driven. And if you have lots of action and different subplots, because you can get through each of them. However, with first person, you can't go through every subplot like you might want to. Your character has to be a part of every single subplot, or those subplots don't really have a place to exist. You just overall don't have much of a chance to advance your subplots that you might have. If you're looking to add a lot of subplots, first person is probably not the perspective for you. Now that we've gone over the pros and cons of writing in the first person perspective, we're going to go over tips to help you write first person better than you might have been able to before. The first thing you're going to want to do to increase your proficiency in first person is to give your character a powerful voice. This is important in every perspective, but especially first person. If your character's voice is not powerful or interesting enough, a reader might not even want to finish your 500-page novel because the character just isn't powerful or they're just far too boring. You are also going to want to stay in the character or narrator's head the entire time. You don't want to deviate and start going into third person. Once you do that, you break the immersion that first person has, and it can be very difficult to get it back. We also just talked about this, but in order to nullify one of the cons of writing in first person, just make sure your sentence structure is varied. But since we already talked about it, I won't go into it again. You are, however, also going to want to avoid certain things. Of course, if there's a way to avoid the avoiding of the good things, then you want to take that path too. It's a game of avoiding however many negatives of the perspective you can. So the first thing you are going to want to not do is head hopping. Head hopping, especially in first person, is the most jarring experience a reader can have. Head hopping is when you change whose head you're in far too often. The only exception to this rule, sort of, is third person omniscient, and that's what we will be getting into next week. However, for most perspectives, especially first person, you are going to want to limit your changes of perspective to at least every chapter. If you feel comfortable with making it to where you can do it with every scene, then you can do that. Just be very careful and don't jar your reader too much. You also want to avoid filler words, and there are a lot of filler words like I, was, thought, maybe. There are a lot of these filler words that you're going to want to be able to cut back on. And I will be making videos about filler words in the future, so if you're interested, make sure to watch out for those. You definitely absolutely do not want to separate the reader from the narrator at all costs. Do not use words that separate the reader from the narrator, as this ruins the intimacy you might find otherwise. A lot of these what not to do and the cons kind of go hand in hand. You are also going to want to avoid having too many point of views. I've discussed this a few times already in the video, but my recommendation is to limit these point of view characters to 2 or 3, and even 3 is pushing it. If you are a master at first person at being able to do these things, then hey, go ahead. Rules are meant to be broken. But for most people, going past 3 first person narrators will affect the story in a very negative way. There are thousands of examples of first person stories, and new ones are being told all the time. There are very popular books told in first person. So I have 3 examples of stories that are told in first person that are very popular or have been very popular in the past. And I have an excerpt from each one to be able to show you how first person can be used as a tool in your writing arsenal. The first example I have is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Everyone knows this story. I don't need to talk about it. It's been everywhere for years now. The Hunger Games is told in the perspective of Katniss, the main character and the hero of the story, and the entire trilogy. I can see the first apple teetering when I let the third arrow go, catching the torn flap and ripping it from the bag. For a moment, everything seems frozen in time. Then the apples spill to the ground and I'm blown backwards into the air. You get to see everything happening from Katniss's point of view, and that excerpt really kind of goes into how you can use a character's voice to the advantage of the story. The next story is Red Queen, Victoria Aveyard. I don't actually know if I pronounced that right, so excuse me if I didn't. This novel is told through the perspective of the character Mare. Mare gets caught in the world of silvers versus red-blooded people. That story is very character-driven. At least from when I read it, that's what it seemed like. If I'm wrong, be sure to debunk me in the comments. I've always wanted her hair, though I'd never tell her that. When hers is like fire, my hair is what we call river brown. Dark at the root, pale at the ends. As the color leaches from our hair with the stress of Stilt's life, most keep their hair short to hide their gray ends, but I don't. I like the reminder that even my hair knows life shouldn't be this way. In this excerpt, we get to see what the world is like around this character, how they think about it. You also get an insight to how they feel about what's going on around them. And that's something that appears very often throughout the novel and its entire trilogy. The next novel we have is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Maybe the life I think I'm living is a paranoid delusion. Sanity is a valuable possession. I hoard it the way people once hoarded money. I save it so I will have enough when the time comes. Just like the last excerpt, this one you get into the character's head and get to experience the world how they feel like it should be, or how they've grown up interpreting the world around them. I'm gonna do something different for this video, and we're gonna do a writing exercise. And this writing exercise is going to help you get into the first person point of view. So what you're going to want to do for this writing exercise is to create a character's voice. Make it strong, make a few of them. And what you're going to want to do is write a paragraph. Write a paragraph in one character's perspective. And then you're going to want to write it in another character's perspective. And then another if you even feel like doing that. And keep doing that in different locations with different ideas and different weather patterns even. It doesn't matter. You're going to want to practice first person and nailing a character's voice. You can do that as many times as you want or not even do it at all. This is, of course, just a suggestion, and you don't have to take this at face value, just like you don't have to do with anything else in our writing sphere. If you have a different exercise you like doing, by all means, do that. And that's it. That's helping you on your path to understanding and writing excellent first-person characters and stories. Remember what I told you in this video, but also don't be afraid to look at other sources to see if maybe someone else can help you with this even more than I have. Comment below what you like about first-person point of view and how I can improve these videos for you in the future. I hope you enjoyed and found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, as I post videos like these every Sunday. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next week. Bye!